So to frame this a little bit, the Douglas Elementary School project was born out of the Master Plan Feasibility Study commissioned by the district in 2015. That studied all of the facilities across the district, and what came out of it is that there were 3 high priority facilities that needed to either be renovated or replaced because they were at that age and condition where we needed to do substantial work. Those 3 facilities were the C.T. Douglas Elementary School, the Gates School, and the Conant School, with the C.T. Douglas Elementary School rising to the top of the list because of the state of the facility. So with that, the district applied to the state MSBA, Massachusetts School Building Authority, for the reimbursement program. Excuse me. And we were accepted into that, and we began a feasibility study this past fall. When we were accepted into the program, one of the first things we did was hire an owner's project manager, and that happened last spring, and we selected Skanska. So I want to introduce Chuck Adam from Skanska and Savathia Sar from Skanska as well. They're with us tonight. And then over the summer, we went back to the School Building Authority where we interviewed a series of architects, and we chose Arrow Street Architects. So I want to introduce Larry Sprang from Arrow Street, who is the principal architect, and then also Emily Grandstaff Rice, who is our project manager and project architect for this. So the bulk of the presentation is going to be Emily tonight, and then an opportunity for you to ask questions as well. The project that specifically has been approved by the state is for the Douglas Elementary School, so it's a given that Douglas will be included. As part of that, we have a variety of options we're required to study. One is what just bringing the school up to code would be for accessibility, fire suppression, things like that. A second would be the renovation and addition to the Douglas Elementary School, which would allow us to expand the school to meet the minimum enrollment requirements that we're projected to have over the next series of years. And then, in addition, what came out of that original 2015 master plan study was that the community was very much in interest of trying to combine 2 schools into one building project. And so what the district proposed to the state, and we've received initial positive feedback on, is the idea of taking 2 schools and combining it in one facility so that we can have some shared efficiencies and also accelerate the building program that we need to do to bring all of our schools up to modern day standards. So right now, we are in the feasibility study. What we're doing is hosting community forums so that over the next 2 weeks we can gather feedback. On December 19th, our building committee is slated to vote on a preferred option, and you're going to have a chance to see the options that are on the table tonight and ask questions about those. But on December 19th, our building committee is scheduled to vote on the preferred option. That will then be submitted to the state, and over the course of the spring, we would do something called a preferred schematic design for the preferred option. That then goes back to the state in the summer in August, where the state would actually vote to fund the project and our actual reimbursement rate. At that point, it would come back to the community, and we would be seeking a vote from both communities in sometime in the middle of the fall next year. We're targeting November, likely, for special town meetings and ballot questions to be able to vote the appropriation to fund the project. At that point, we would move into the construction phase. So that's where we are in the overall timeline for this, but I'm going to turn it over now to Emily and let her walk you through the various options and then answer any questions you have. So thank you very much, and here's Emily.
Good evening. So my name is Emily Grandstaff Rice. I'm an architect. I work for Arrow Street. Our office is in Boston. I work on K through 12 schools, so that's kindergarten to grade 12, just to ensure that you understand sort of, I've got some background here. I have an 8-year-old at home and I have a 12-year-old. And I've had a busy day. I've been to 5 different schools today, which is kind of nuts because I had to do parent-teacher conferences. So that's a whole different story. I'm really excited to work on this project because as an architect, for me, this is one of the most rewarding things to do, to design a building that helps people learn, helps people grow, and to become citizens who think and really get to explore new ideas. That's not what every building does, but for me, this is something that brings me great joy. And I know it brings Larry great joy as well as all of the other people that work on this project who aren't actually here right now. So one of the reasons that we were also excited is that we have some Acton residents in our office. And I get the little, I'll call them love notes on my desk from time to time. So thank you for coming tonight. I'm going to talk about where we are in the process. So a feasibility study is really an exploration to see what we can do with the different constraints that we have. And the way that I'll call it a problem, was posed is that we're looking at the option of building a single school or combining two schools together, right? And would it be on the Douglas site, on the Gates site, and the Conant site? Now, each of these sites are unique, and that's kind of the challenge. So what type of school will it be, and where should it be? And that's really the crux of the feasibility study. So this is where we are now. And so in order to find all the information that we need to get to go and to make the right decision, we did a lot of existing conditions analysis, walking the existing schools, as well as educational planning. So these were large groups with, frankly, all of the administrators, not just those of the 3 schools, but the principals of all the other schools, talking about how Acton-Boxborough will teach in the future, not just today, but where is education going and how the facilities can really support that, that vision and that growth, and frankly also be flexible, because the buildings are intended to last for a minimum of 50 years. So we know how probably for the kids, your parents or your grandparents were taught 50 years ago is a lot different than today. Well, imagine what that might be 50 years from now. So the buildings need to be flexible. And so what we've come up with is a group of alternatives. And I'm going to walk through these alternatives tonight. We came up with 5. They're numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And I'll walk through those. So the next step is we're going to pick one. So we're going to submit what's called the preferred schematic report. That is the vote that the superintendent was talking about. And so the next step after that is then we really start to get down to the individual spaces and design what the building could be, what it could look like from a schematic phase. From there, then it's estimated, it's vetted, and we go to the state to really figure out what the funding would be, so how much the building would cost, and frankly, how much the state would also reimburse as part of this program. So the three sites, obviously Douglas here, Gates, and Conant. If you notice, the Douglas school looks a little different than Gates and Conant. They were all built, or they were all designed by very reputable architects in the 60s. For me, it's really fascinating being able to walk through these buildings because it's a moment in time, and they're firms that I respect a lot. The one that did these 2 are still in practice. The one that did Douglas actually is no longer an architecture firm. They have moved on. So, but it is kind of a moment in time of what learning, let's say, the future of learning was in 1965, which is when Douglas opened. So that's great, but what does it not have, right? We know a lot more now. A lot of times when you're in buildings, especially with kids, there's sprinklers, right, in case there was a fire or anything like that. That's really important. And also think about people who aren't able-bodied and need help getting around. A lot of times there's elevators, there's ramps, there's door handles that you can easily hold. That isn't right now in the Douglas School. So when you look at the feasibility of reusing these schools, there's a lot of other things that need to go into place. And also building codes have changed. So we did an analysis of what the different types of learning spaces were in these schools, and frankly what the state would expect for a building to be designed in 2018. I'll give you the really brief overview. Gyms are a lot bigger. The gym that is in Douglas, Gates, and Conant is about half the size of what the state would expect a gym to be. Essentially, it's sized for middle school basketball is kind of the metric that we use. Also, the cafeterias are a lot smaller than what you would expect for the population of students that you have in these schools. Also, there aren't, frankly, special education spaces to support the way that Acton-Boxborough supports all of its students. So that is something that you would see in a new building that you don't have in the existing buildings that you have today. So how did we come to some of these decisions? We had a lot of meetings. A lot of people came together. Actually, some students joined us and came up with some great ideas. There was one gentleman who was insistent that we should have a skateboard park and a slide and all of this other stuff. So it really reinforces to me when we have these meetings that a building in a community isn't just one person or one vision. It's really all about the voices that come together, and that's sort of reinforced by us talking about this tonight. And this is not the first time we'll hold community forums. You might even get sick of us continuing to have this conversation, but we welcome the feedback, and we really want you to be part of the process. We also talk about sustainability. This is something that's extremely important about this. So question to the audience. Who can tell me in the front row what sustainability is? Do you know? Sure.
It means like a building can last a long time and be sustainable, basically.
Yeah, that's a great answer. It's a building can last a long time because resources, in other words, what it takes to build a building, is, it's important, and we have to respect the earth. We have to respect the energy we use. Ever heard, please turn the lights out, or don't run the water while you brush your teeth? All that fun stuff. Buildings are one of the largest energy uses beyond cars, beyond planes. So really designing buildings that support not just the values of what we do, but also sort of walk the walk in terms of being energy efficient and using the building as a teaching tool to reinforce these is extremely important. And that's one of the reasons actually that Aero Street is so excited to be part of this project, because the district has an ambitious goal to become something called triple net zero. And that means net zero energy. So as much energy as you produce, or as much energy as you consume, you also produce. And so ways to do that is with solar panels, or using a heating system called a ground source heat pump, where you actually use wells that take some energy or sort of warmth and cooling from the ground, as well as net zero water. So making sure that any of the water that comes out of the building is treated properly, as well as net zero waste. And so that's the idea that the waste that we generate, both creating the building, but also in using the building, is diverted from landfills, right? So it's really about making the world a better place through learning and through this building. So we had a sustainability workshop on Monday, and I know some people in the crowd were at that. And we really kind of put all the issues on the table. So I'm going to move a little faster here. When we say this is going to be a combined school of Douglas and Gates, or Douglas and Conant, what does that mean? Essentially that means it's going to be one building, very similar to Parker Damon, right? But there'll be two schools within that. And within the school, Douglas will have 3 kindergarten rooms, 18 classrooms, so that's grades 1 through 6, a multi-purpose classroom, recognizing that sometimes things are beyond grades, right? 2 special education classrooms, small group learning rooms, quiet and sensory spaces. I know sometimes I need quiet, and I need a timeout, as my daughter would tell me. As well as art and music classrooms, cafeteria and stage, and administration and support. That's kind of a fancy way of saying the principal's office or other specialists, right? So the other school that will be part of this consolidated building, whether it be Gates or Conant, that's kind of what we're going to be talking about tonight, based on what site we pick, will have the same as the Douglas School. So 3 kindergarten classrooms, 18 general classrooms, multi-purpose special education, small group learning, quiet and sensory spaces, art, music, cafeteria, stage, and administration. Part of this project will also be establishing classrooms for the preschool program, which is currently in the administration building. So that portion will be 10 preschool classrooms and with those, their own associated small learning spaces. So small learning spaces are really important in education today, because sometimes kids need either intervention or enrichment, as well as learning to work in small groups, as well as individual. And having those spaces that are acoustically separated or provide those opportunities close to the classrooms allows for kids to get that extra attention without having to travel long distances. And also, if there's a situation where a teacher has trust and can let the kids be independent, they can send them out to these small learning spaces. So these are really beneficial. I will say in Douglas, there are some rooms where there are sort of sectioned areas where you've got, let's say, 3 or 4 small learning spaces within one big classroom, right? And then the shared spaces, one of the ways in which you can be very efficient with a single facility is to be able to share some things that you couldn't have necessarily if it was just one building. So this would be 2 case collaborative classrooms to support the case collaborative program. English language education, so when we did the educational visioning, recognizing that there's some synergy to have a consolidated group for the English language program, and so that teachers could work with each other and work beyond the schools. OT-PT therapy spaces, and some synergy with combining those. Additional music and art classrooms beyond in the individual schools, a gymnasium and health and wellness. So we recognize that one gym might not be enough for this group, especially if there's going to be Douglas and another school there. So the health and wellness would be the same size as the existing gym that's in Douglas, as well as medical and nurse, a media center, that's another way of saying library, that's kind of like the space that we're in right now, but have a very large one for all of the schools, and have a shared kitchen and shared conference rooms, recognizing that it's important to have spaces for adults to come in to talk to, as well as community for meeting. So that's a lot. There's a lot that goes into this building. So the size of this building is being designed as 187,000 square feet. So how did we get there? There was a lot of math involved, but also working through what the current needs of the schools are, and also basing that on the MSBA standards for what they would assume for a population of 1,000 students. So this is being designed for 1,000 students. The current student enrollment for Douglas is around 400 right now. If it was a single school, they would assume it would be 650. How did they get to that number? They looked at enrollment projections over the next 10 years. When it's a 2-school situation, the student enrollment projection was 1,000 students. So essentially, if you divide that in 2, it would be 500 students per school. And I'm happy to talk about this in detail if anyone has any questions of how we got to the size of the building. So some of another thing that we really treasure about this is the landscape around the building. This is a unique area. Our landscape architect kind of jokes that she has clients that pay tens of thousands of dollars to get what you have naturally on this really beautiful land. And so as we're looking forward to the next phase, we're fascinated by this idea of how can we bring the nature into the building and really create an opportunity that when you're in the building, you have a sense of the beauty of the landscape and that the building feels part of the site. So in the Douglas site, we've got a photo here from the wetlands. I was talking to some of the students about the marsh and what are some of the limitations with building a building there. And of course on the other side, the gates. And then the third site we looked at was the Conant school site. So I'm going to jump into some of the details about the site. So on the left, we have the Douglas School here and Gates School here. And in the middle is Fort Pond Brook. So Fort Pond Brook and the associated wetlands around that have implications for where we can build. And you can see the line here shows the 75-foot wetland setback, as well as the blue is the floodplain, so the 100-year floodplain. So in other words, the government does a lot of maps to estimate if you had a really, really bad rain, where would the area be affected the most? And as you can see, what's interesting is that the floodway, or the floodplain, 100-year floodplain, actually comes right up to the left of Douglas, which was something that we didn't realize until we checked the maps. And it also kind of surrounds the gates, actually very similar to the wetland setback. Conant's a little different. There is a 100-year floodplain to the south, and there is a stream that goes through the middle, Mary's Brook, excuse me. But it's classified differently than the one that's on the Douglas Gates site. In other words, it's intermittent, which means sometimes there's water and sometimes the water goes away. So it's not always active, similar to the one that's on the Douglas Gates site, Fort Pond Brook. And so it doesn't have the same rules in terms of buildability, excuse me. So although there aren't, let's say, rules, we think that it's really important to keep a 50-foot buffer from that waterway. It's just the right thing to do to not build too close to it. And what you're seeing here with the red lines are zoning. So we also have to follow the rules of Acton to make sure that we don't build right up to our site. As you can see, those don't really make a big difference. It's more the water and the flood plain that changes what we can do on the sites. And so these gray lines here, you can see are called topographic marks. And so if you've got a lot of lines close together, it means that the earth is kind of going like this, right? It's more of a steep hill. I don't know if anybody goes sledding, right? So if you go sledding, the lines would be really close together. But if you had a flat area, it would be very spread out. So you can see around the water in Douglas Gates, you've got some flat area. You've also got a great flat area over here to the left of Douglas, but unfortunately that's also in the floodplain. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. Conant is a different site, so there's some unique things about them. Okay, so we were trying to figure out, of all the things out there, what could we study? The MSBA has some rules. We have to study a base code upgrade. So we have to have one of the options, what would it take to just upgrade the Douglas? And so don't make any educational improvements, just find out how much it costs to upgrade it by code. I'm not going to talk a lot about that one. The other one that we have to look at is an addition renovation scheme. When we looked at that, we decided the addition renovation scheme would just be the single school. So let's say if you added the space that you needed to add to get Douglas from 400 students to 650, what would that look like? And I can talk about some of those spaces. And then we looked at what would it be if we had 2 schools on the Douglas Elm. And I'm noticing Elm here. In other words, we looked at what it would be if we actually went to the left and used the Elm Street playground, knowing that there's some political issues about that. Also, what would it be for the Gates and what would it be for the Conant? Okay, so what school is this? Thank you. Okay. I'm going to start with Douglas. So with Douglas, this was just the base code upgrade, not doing anything, not even upgrading the modulars. Put in sprinklers, accessibility, some seismic, fire alarm. This is kind of a scheme that we're not going to spend any time on it, but we do need to estimate it for the state so they can recognize that we did it. So that's option number 1. We're not recommending it. We have to do it for study only. Okay, option number 2 is what if we saved the classrooms, so this is the 2-story portion of Douglas, as classrooms, and then tore down all of the gym, the cafeteria, the nurses, the kitchen, all of that, and built new portions of that, okay? And the reason that would be important is because the gym is actually not, the state believes the gym is not big enough for a school of 650 students. So to renovate that would actually be pretty complicated. So this is a scheme where we would save this portion of it and actually build 3 levels. And what's interesting about that is that's still an additional 90,000 square feet. So you basically would be building, you would have 2/3 new construction and 1/3 renovation. So we've got this on the table. We're not recommending it, but we have to do an ad reno scheme as part of the larger state framework for study. And so these squares you see over here are representing some of the systems that we need to look at in terms of the building. So this would be the approximate size for a septic system. So because we have to be net zero water and that there is no sewer system on site, we have to make sure that we take care of the water that would come out of the school, from the kitchen, from the toilets, from the sinks, all that sort of stuff. And part of that is making sure that you have the area in the land to have that go back down into the groundwater. We're also planning for something called geothermal, which is the wells that go in the ground, which help us regulate sort of the heating and cooling of the building. So in this school, that would be about 40,000 square feet. And of course, parking. So these are some of the other factors that we're looking at with the site. So if we were to do an option that looks for an ad reno, and this is really quick, and it's really, really simple, that's kind of what it would look like, right? Okay, so let's move on to a consolidated school. So Douglas and Gates on the Douglas site. So some of the students were asking me earlier, why didn't you print out a big one of what the Douglas site looked like? So for those of you who asked me the question, here it is. To build a 187,000 square foot building on the Douglas site, we recognized that in order to make it fit, we would need to go into the Elm Street playground. Of course, the district does not own that land. We recognized that that would be something that we would have to look into further. What we found eventually was that based on what we could do with the wetland setback, as well as we had to ensure that we kept the existing septic in place. You have to make sure that the existing building functions while you're building the new portion of it, and all of these other options. It made a very linear, long building. In fact, it was almost 725 feet long, right? And we're doing a lot of studies. What you see tonight is just one of like 20 that we had in our office. In the end, the school building committee decided that this was probably not a feasible option to continue to study because of the constraints of the site. And the fact that most of the Elm Street portion was in the 100-year flood zone. So most of the schemes that we're going to show you tonight, with the exception of a portion of the Conant one, are 3 stories. We're trying to minimize the footprint to make it as efficient as possible. And what we're finding with the size of this building is that we need to look at 3 stories. If we went to 2 stories, these buildings would be much bigger on the land and might not even fit. And so just the idea of being this close to the adjacent houses and the abutters and having a very tall building, it didn't really make sense to keep going with this one. That's a very quick sort of massing of what it would look like. Of course, there would be other ways to do it, but we're really constrained by the linear, long nature of the site. So what site is this? Gates. Okay, there we go. So let's look at the Gates site. And the next options I'm going to show you, think of them kind of as 4A and 4B. So one option is we can keep the existing building where it is and build an entirely new building to its right for 187,000 square feet. That's sort of the A options that we're going to show. Another option is the idea that you could build half, or let's say 103 square feet of a building at Gates, and in this case the Gates students would stay where they are. When this portion is complete, the Gates students would then move in, and then this other portion for the remaining, this is when I do the math really quickly, 84,000 square feet would be built, and then the Douglas students could move over here. So in both of these situations, I think we are looking at taking the softball fields that are currently on Gates and locating them on the Douglas property. So in that case, the Douglas school would actually be demolished. In all of these cases, we're also looking at 180 parking spots. In this scenario, we can fit all of the 180 parking spots, but if we did a configuration like this, we would need to have, let's say, 60 parking spots on the Douglas side. So some people feel that that's a really long way to walk. But in fact, that's the same distance as it would take to walk to the edge of Parker Damon, to the farthest parking spot in that parking lot, just for comparison. We also got some questions about the walkway across Fort Pond Brook. The idea would be to upgrade it so it would be plowable by a small plowing implement, but not necessarily a roadway. So it would just be a walkway across. So that's one of the options. And I should back up a moment. This is really an opportunity for you to give us feedback and provide your thoughts on these. We really want to hear what you're thinking, what you're seeing, to help us move forward. Do you have a question?
I want to keep Douglas where it is because my house is near the top of the map and I can bike to Douglas.
That is an excellent reason. We will definitely note that. Thank you. So this is a quick massing, similar to how the other quick massings were, of what this could look like on the gate site. Again, sort of maintaining the 75-foot setback as we can. In this scenario, one of the things that we're looking at is the traffic flow, right? So what we would like to do is find a way to bring buses on Arlington Street and have a way for them to be able to turn around. We're still sort of working through some of the configurations of the parking, but have a way for the buses to be able to turn around and then come back on Arlington Street to avoid some of the buildup on Spruce Street. So there's a massing of the two-phase gates building. And the third site is? Okay, there we go. Yes?
Are they gonna, I forgot what I was gonna say.
That's okay. When you remember it, let me know. Quickly, and then I promise I'll let you guys answer questions first, and then we'll go to the...
If they build a new school, what is it gonna be made out of?
Great question. Okay, can I answer his question? So buildings are made out of lots of things. A lot of times they're made out of brick. Sometimes they're made out of metal. Sometimes they're made out of paper products, something called drywall. But a lot of different materials go into it. And so one of the things that architects do is select materials that are healthy, right? Because some materials can make people sick. So, yep, like lead, exactly. We take that really seriously, that schools are built with responsible materials that last, that don't make kids sick. That's a great question. Okay.
Say that Douglas, like if the school is Douglas and Conant, for an example, are they gonna like, say Douglas is ready and Conant isn't quite yet, are they gonna have the kids who go to Douglas and not Conant yet, or are they gonna just keep nobody there?
That's a great question. That's really similar to the phasing that I was talking about, right? About how having half of the building done and then deciding which school do we move? Do we move the Douglas students or the Conant students? I don't have an answer for you, but that's a great question that we're going to look at. So that's a great point. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. I'm not always good about listening, so if I don't listen, let me know. Okay, so Conant site. I promise, I'm almost to the end. So there aren't 10 options. There's only 5, and we're in 5A. So in the Conant site, it's a little different. We don't have the same restrictions with the wetlands. And one of the actually advantages that we've got here is there's a septic system that's sort of somewhat remote. So we don't have to worry as much as sort of the logistics about having the septic system in place while the existing school is still up. In all these scenarios, we are looking at the option of keeping the students in place. There's a whole other study that we could look at in terms of having students in modulars or off-site. But I will advise you that the MSBA doesn't reimburse that, right? So that's an investment that you don't get state money for. And a lot of times there's sort of a cost-benefit analysis that you have to look at if the building can be completed earlier if you actually have students relocate temporarily. So this is an example of what a single phase Conant school could be. You can sort of see the outline of the existing school. And then also an option where you could have a two-phase, where, to your point, I think what we would probably do is if this portion of the building was done first and the Conant students were here, we'd actually have to move the Conant students out, because then that school would be taken down to build the Douglas side of it. So in each scenario, it's a little different. We're respecting the existing buffer zone, or sorry, wetland. Can't even talk today. The existing woodland zone to the north, recognizing that there are some abutters here, and this is something that, you know, we want to have as great as educational impact, but also be respectful of the existing landscape that you have, and also make sure that we can fit all of the areas in terms of the parking and the transportation. In this scenario, we're looking at widening Minot Avenue. I'm working on my pronunciation of that, so I'm almost there. To be able to have two access points into the Conant site. So this also helps, frankly, with some construction traffic in and out, so that there would be one access point to the north, as well as being able to come off Taylor Road. So that would be the 5B. And this is a quick shot of what a portion of the building could look like in relation to those northern woodland boundary. So that's sort of all the options that we have tonight. We'd really like to get your feedback on option 4 and option 5, because we've decided that options 1, 2, and 3 are something that we needed to do, but we're not necessarily going to push them further. So what's the next steps? We had the sustainability workshop on Monday. We had a community forum in this room on Tuesday. We're here tonight on the 29th. The next meeting of the school building committee is on the 12th of December. On the 13th, the next night, we're going to follow up with the school committee. And this is leading up to an anticipated vote for the school building committee on December 19th, of which is the preferred scheme we go forward with. So after that, we need to package some of the documentation and all of the findings that we have to date and submit to the state on January 2nd. You might say, well, January 2nd, that's kind of a bizarre deadline date. It's actually exactly 6 weeks ahead of the MSBA board meeting on February 18th, where the state will review and approve us to go to schematic design. So moving on to there, then we would we'd really get into the depth of the preferred site and design the building through May 15th. And this is it's a very intense effort. We will talk to students, we'll talk to teachers, we'll talk to community members. Again, there will be a lot of conversations. And ultimately, this all sort of leads up to an MSBA board meeting on August 28th, of which we'll know the price of this project, and we'll get state approval. And then eventually, well, as Chuck would say, you have within 120 days past that for town votes. So I know there's a lot of questions. We will stay here as long as we need to, and I will pass it back to Mary.
I'm Mary Brolin. I'm on school committee and the school building committee. A couple things before we do questions and answers. In the back, there's a sign-up sheet if you want to be on our email list. We are posting everything through the schools and the district, so if you're a parent, you really don't need to sign up, but we have other community members who may not be on those lists. Let's see, we have a website. If you go to the school's website, there's a link for the school building project, and we're posting all of our information there, so please use that to keep up to date. We also have a Facebook page and a Twitter, so you can get up to date that way. We will be doing a survey that'll come out through the district's email system. We'll post it on the website, and I have to get permission, but if I can, I just realized that Acton has a special town meeting Monday night, and I'll bring hard copies if people want to fill it out there. And then I'm just going to ask that, you know, we all have different opinions. Some of this is emotional, and as people are speaking, I just want to ask that we all be respectful so that we can hear the different viewpoints here. So, questions. We'll take the first row first. You want to let the grown-ups go? Okay. So questions in the audience, and I'm going to ask you to use the mic because we are recording this.
In terms of energy use, it seems like some of those designs have more surface area and probably less energy efficient. How much has that been considered? And the other thing in terms of energy use that I thought of is, have studies been done about what these bus routes are going to be like, and if over the years of the school, the energy that the buses use up and the time it takes for kids to get to school and all that sort of stuff, has that been considered in the planning?
Do you want to take that? Turn your mic on.
There we go. Now my mic is on. We take that very seriously, and part of the size of the building that we have, as well as maintaining the right depth for classrooms to maximize daylight in. So we want this building to be as efficient as possible in terms of footprint, but also be appropriate for the community. So we are looking at it. We're also looking at shading studies and solar optimization. We're still in feasibility, so there's some work to be done in terms of the building shape.
Of the plans you're proposing, you don't have information about which of those is the most energy efficient?
Well, right now it's a complex thing. We're setting energy targets, so for our EUI, and we're working with that. So yeah, we're still in feasibility.
These designs are very preliminary. The final building could look completely different from what you're seeing tonight. This is just, can it fit on the site kind of thing.
And then in terms of bus transportation, I'm going to pass that to JD.
Yeah, and just to follow up real quick on the EUI aspect of it, our goal is design a building at ultra low EUI to set that target in a preliminary stage. So as we go through this entire process of schematic design, we always have that in the back of our mind. So will this window wall, will that facade adding more daylight here, positive, negatives of that on our energy use intensity per square foot in the facility as it pans out. As far as the busing goes, and if Peter wants to add anything to this, feel free. Because of the way we do our school system, our school choice system in Acton and Boxborough, the location of the school wouldn't have a significant impact on the carbon footprint of the transportation system because we bus anyone and everyone from everywhere to anywhere, right? So if you drop that here versus here, there really is no large impact, except for like the deadhead miles, right? But we actually don't know right now what the long-term location will be of our bus parking. So quite frankly, the largest gains you would have is if you knew what those deadhead miles would be if there's a proximal location for bus parking near any one of these other sites, which we do not know right now, because that's something in our long-term plan to solve, quite frankly.
Thank you. I just want to clarify, make sure I'm understanding. We're going, the proposals are we're going from 3 school buildings to 2 school buildings. We're combining either Gates and Douglas, or we're combining Douglas and Conant with 1,000 children in the new combined school. That's correct. So the decision, and so what happens with the other school? Like if you combine Conant and Douglas, what happens to Gates?
So the plan is if we were to combine Douglas and Conant, then we're going to need another building project. You know, we're in a district with 9 buildings, so every few years there's going to be a new building project. Gates will be the next building project. We have been submitting applications to the state for Gates and Conant continuously since Douglas was selected because we would like to get in their process again. They're giving us right now a 45% reimbursement. So we would be working on that. And then in case anyone has the question, if it were a Conant-Douglas option, then the Douglas school is empty. We will do something with that building. I don't know what we will do yet. It depends. If it's a Gates-Douglas option, then Douglas will be knocked down and become the ball fields. If it's a Conant Douglas option, then we may actually keep that building for a little while, and when we do a new build on Gates, we might use it as swing space, move the students in there, get rid of the Gates building, but we don't know. That's pretty far in the future, but I will guarantee you, even though I won't be on the school committee that far into the future, we will not leave a derelict building in the community. We absolutely will not. We will be really responsible neighbors. Other questions? Okay, I'm going to go way over here.
I just wanted to ask a question on Site 4, the double school at the Gates site. Has there been any studies done to the effect of the water table with that large of a building on there? I mean, the water table there is pretty high as it is. I'm sure some pumps are going to be running day and night if that building goes up. I just didn't know if you did studies or if you have a plan to divert water away.
Yeah, we have a plan to do, as one school building committee member says, dig some holes and a percolation test. We recognize that both the Douglas and Gates site, Douglas more than any, have water, and we need to work with that. And we have experience building buildings in flood plains, so it can be done. You just need to do it carefully and plan for that high water table if you do need to do it. But you have options, and I think that's going to require some further study.
So I have two questions. Number one is, how is the school building committee going to be making the final decision on a site selection? And number two, how are you going to prioritize all the different factors that go into it? How would you prioritize maybe the top four?
Those are hard questions. We're going to take all the information we have. We're a 20-member committee, and bring it together and look at it and make the best decision we can from that. That information is going to include information from this forum and the forum we had on Tuesday night. We're asking the school committee for their input, even though they don't vote this piece of it. We are going to do a survey, that survey that I mentioned, that will go into it. And then all of the information that Emily and the consultants that they're working with are bringing to us. So as much as we're going to know about traffic, about any test sites that are done on the land, is there ledge there, are there water issues, and bring all that together and make the decision based on that. We're learning. It's an incredibly fast process that we've been under, and so we're learning new information all the time. December 12th, I expect we're going to learn a lot of new information, and then December 19th is the decision. So we're doing our homework with reading materials beforehand, and we're going to do our best from there. At this point, we haven't set up any kind of matrix and weighting and all of that. That might be something we talk about on the 12th. How are we going to make this decision? If people need a tool like that, I could build a tool, or Emily and I could do it, something like that. But I don't know that answer right now.
Hi, I'm Danny Factor. I'm on one of the members of the board of directors of Green Acton, but my question more comes as a private citizen. I'm definitely concerned, particularly on the Gates site, about the water issue with Guggins Brook, particularly looking at not only the 100-year flood maps, but one of the things that you often don't see incorporated are 500-year flood maps, which you would think wouldn't be relevant. But with, one of the things when you're talking about sustainability that has to be taken into account is the effects of climate change. You guys know about that at all? Yep, that's right. And if you look at, some of the other areas of the country, Houston had 2 500-year floods in less than 5 years. So one of the things that I wonder is we have in Acton a conservation committee that will approve projects, and also any, if you guys feel that because of the flooding, say you need to take mitigation measures, such as a retaining wall or or a dam. There's also then concerns about the impact of all of those things on the environment, as well. And normally the process would be, if you'd need some sort of a waiver then to have something like that built, it would go to the Conservation Committee, but it would only go to the Conservation Committee to be approved once you've already chosen which site. What my question is before you make a decision about the site, would you consider going to the Acton Conservation Committee and getting their comment before the decision is made?
Do you want to field that one? Or?
Absolutely. I'm fishing through my notes here. I've had conversations with, forgive me if I get his name wrong, Tom Tidman? Yes. Right.
That Conservation Committee is the advisory committee to that department.
Yes.
And while town staff is wonderful to deal with, what's nice about the committee aspect of it is that it's made up of citizens, that live in Acton. So I would encourage you not only to continue to interface with Tom, but also with the Acton Conservation Committee as well, and get the individual comments of those citizens.
I think that's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Could we do that by December 19th? Could that committee come together with us quickly?
I would start by sending an email.
Thank you. Yep.
Noted.
Other questions? I'm getting my steps in.
Hi. So I'm on the board of the AB softball, and those two fields that would be impacted are heavily used. So I have a couple of questions about it. One, are you convinced that that plot of property would be big enough for two softball fields, one of which would be used by the junior high probably too? Secondly, I know the plan is a stage, if we do a stage plan, it's going to take a while for new softball fields to be built. And thirdly, would those softball fields be on the floodplain?
All good questions. I know, Chuck, you're very excited about answering this. We got the same question on Tuesday, and I have to say I am so impressed by the advocacy for softball in Acton and Box Row. It's really amazing.
We got asked that question on Tuesday night as well, and the gentleman who asked that question, he said, can you give us an idea of how long those fields will be off? And I shot right away, 3 years. He looked, he said, shocked, 3 years. Well, if you look at the process we're taking here in the building of this, if you take, we will need the space where the softball fields are now. And the Conant school, the Douglas School has to stay in operation until we can build them. So we have to build the school on the site of the fields, wait, move the kids over, tear the school down, replace the fields. Whether or not they'll fit, there'll have to be some more study to have a bigger field, to see if the bigger fields can go over there. Our first impression is, yes, they will fit there. There'll have to be some additional site work done over there, but that's okay, that can be part of the project. So the long and the short of it is, one, I think they will fit, and two, they're offline for a minimum of three years. One, because the time it takes to build the project, and two, the time it takes to rebuild the fields and let the fields grow for a full year, anyhow. So I know that's not the answer that everybody wanted to hear, but that's the reality of trying to use that land the most effective way we can.
And there was a piece about the flood zone.
Yeah, it's not unusual these days. We're finding with the more we build schools in areas where they're tighter sites, it's not unusual to see athletic fields that are not built for varsity sports to be built in or near floodplains. It's not unusual. It's not ideal, but it's not unusual because you have limited space. So I'm afraid that, yes, they could be built in there. There are things we can do to help protect them, the longevity of them, But yeah, it is a reality of having a limited amount of space.
Hi, Tara Fredericks, West Acton. I have a two-part question. The first part is, I want to just go over, because it's been a while since I've looked at this, the cost of just building the Douglas School right where it is. Because I don't have any kids in schools, but I'm totally sympathetic to the Douglas parents, and I would love to at least consider that more strongly. And then the other question is what is the cost of waiting? Because a lot of this stuff is like kind of a surprise to me, and I go to all the meetings, and I was looking at a completely different layout of buildings, and so this is sort of new to me, and like 2 weeks seems a really short time to do surveys and get community input. And Conservation Commission it is, Danny, and they actually approve the permits. It's different than an advisory, but thank you.
So the first question is about the cost of building just a single school. And then the second is the cost of waiting. So the feeling that the December 19th vote is too soon, what's the cost in terms of our relationship with MSBA, but also costs in terms of building?
I'll take the second one first, because believe it or not, that's the easier one. The cost of waiting is significant, unfortunately. The cost of waiting is those of us that are in the industry, and there's a number of you in the room, I'm sure of it, I'm sure are, and realize that the cost of construction here in Massachusetts goes up yearly almost exponentially now. It used to be in the old days we would say that the cost of construction grows at a rate of at least 3% a year. In the past 2 years, it's been growing anywhere from the average of 5 to 6%, if not more. And that has a lot to do with the fact that it's a very, very busy marketplace, and a shortage of labor has a great to deal with what's going on in the marketplace right now. So the cost of waiting means you'll pay more in the long run. How that affects with your relationship with the MSBA puts you into this, allowed you into this program with a finite deadline. Meaning that if you don't accept their terms of being into the process at this point, they will move on to the next town. That's just the reality. There are 360-odd towns here in Massachusetts, and there's a long list of people that want access to, I won't say their money, to your money. This is tax dollars. This is how they collect the money that they share. You're getting your tax dollars back. So therefore, the longer you wait, the more you'll pay because of construction costs and inflation and everything else. I won't even get into discussion of tariffs in the industry and all of that. We all know what that's like, and it's scary, but it's reality. You then get into being pushed out of the MSBA program. So why are these deadlines so condensed? They're condensed because the MSBA reacts to projects that are presented to them on their board meetings, and they meet every other month. They don't meet monthly. So therefore, in order to hit their deadlines, we have to back up 6 weeks at a time to make the submissions to them in order to meet their deadlines. So it's a process. We all wish there were improvements to the process, but I can assure you the process works. We've been doing schools here in Massachusetts since the MSBA was founded in 2004, and it's been highly successful to a number of towns, and we believe it will for you. I would love to have seen this extended. We talked about it at one time, but the fear was if you would extend this deadline, you would get pushed out and maybe pushed off, and we didn't want to have you realize the cost increase that would incur. So that's why we're at the deadline. I'm trying to remember, I was a long-winded answer, and I apologize to what your first question was.
Building a single Douglas school on the Douglas site.
The cost to building a single Douglas school on the Douglas site would entail finding homes for 400 students or 400 classroom space for 400 students outside of the Douglas space. We looked at the options of trying to build a school adjacent to on the small site that's attached to it. In one, we advise the school building committee, one, we'd find it expensive to do, it'd be a very tight site, but two, the timing of doing it again starts to push you out into years, which makes it very difficult to do. So again, we don't know the cost at this time because it's one of the options we discussed with the school building committee, and it didn't make a lot of sense to all of us for a lot of reasons, and that's just one of them.
If I can just, excuse me, if I can just jump in on that too. I think, one of the costs associated may not even just be on the Douglas project. It could be on subsequent building projects as well. We know that we have 3 schools that really need either significant amount of renovation or replacement. And so if we opt to only go with 1 school at this time as a community, that means the next building we can do with MSBA is probably 7 to 10 years away. And then it would be an additional 7 to 10 years for that 3rd school. And over that time period, you're also, looking at the same construction escalation costs that, Chuck just talked about. So I think, it's really about the economic feasibility of combining those schools into one facility, I think is really critical at this point. It's also something that I think the decision to do that was made several years ago and to try and pursue that option as a community. We also know that when you combine schools into a single footprint, into a building, you're also saving on construction costs that way and design costs, because at this point, now you're building one footprint, one foundation for that building, one roof for the building, one boiler system for the building that can also serve multiple facilities. So if you chose to go in separate facilities, you'd also be building 2 of everything as well. So that's an opportunity cost as well, I think.
Okay, I'm going to scoot around here. Let's see.
Does the MSBCA, is there a specific level of LEEDs program that they require, or for different funding, certain amount of funding for higher LEEDs certification?
Yes. The minimum now with the MSBA is you have to, what is the old day, it was LEEDs. You had to at least meet LEED certified or LEED silver is now the minimum. That they won't even consider you for anything more than that. I mean, for anything until you reach that level. So you have to commit to doing that anyhow. The further you move up in the ladder of LEED is you can then start to hear that there may be possible additional reimbursement points for going greater things. However, as we've sat with JD and sat with the school district and with the consultants, it almost become the LEED percentages and the LEED things almost become irrelevant when you start talking about EUIs and start talking about net zero waste. Because that's much more efficient and much more value to your dollar than trying to reach a LEED certification, to be honest with you. So you're actually reaching a little higher than most would ask, but in the long run, it's the smarter thing to do, as we see it in the industry happening every day. But it's a great question. It's changed, the industry's changed a whole lot, so that the LEED certification is almost absolutely the minimum you're going to do anyhow.
Another quick question. Can you briefly go over the difference of 500 students, then you combine them, or 650 students for single versus 1,000?
Yeah, this goes back to initially when the district submitted their statement of interest and were accepted into the program. Then there's an analysis based on population, especially school-age children within that population, and estimating how many students this school needs to grow. Do you want to talk a little bit about enrollment?
Yeah, so you've probably, if you've been paying attention at all, you've heard from us about declining enrollment in the district, and it was pretty severe. In the last 2 years, the housing market in Acton and Boxborough has turned around dramatically, and we thought we were going to decline a lot more, and we're not. Now the new projections are that we are actually at the elementary level for several years, and then the elementary level is going to start increasing. So we have done extended estimates. Peter and Marianne Ashton here in the Acton community have helped us for years with estimates, and NESDEC does estimates, and so we've worked with them and MSBA, and we really got MSBA to look with us out. They normally look at a 10-year window. They looked a little further with us because we were declining. we knew we were going to come back up. And so they looked at some of those later numbers to size it for what we're going to need in the future. So I think that what I'm hearing part of your question is if you took 650 and 500, that's 1150, not 1,000. And some of it is the math and how you project combined, and what happens to the other schools can free up some seats in the other schools, because we would also do like a case collaborative room, so that could free up a room potentially, say, at Blanchard, and so then more kids can go in there. So it's some of that playing across the district as well.
Yeah, but for the purpose of this study, we were told by the MSBA, the design team, that if you design a single school, it's 650. If you design a combined school, the numbers are actually a little more nuanced, that if it's Douglas and Gates, it's 990, and if it's Douglas and Conant, it's 1,015. So for talking purposes, we just say 1,000, but yeah.
Yeah, we gave them all the data, they decide.
Yeah.
They looked at our longer-term data. Okay, I'm going to go over here. Well, actually, I'm going to go here.
Do you have any estimate of project complexity and cost, and is that going to be part of your decision process, and are you going to share that tonight? I also was wondering, does the building committee have a favored option at this point, and could you tell us why if you do?
Cost part.
Yeah, I'll take the cost part, but I can also answer the second part for you. No, they don't have a favor as far as we've been told yet, because I don't want to know yet. I want to know when they get all the information. Now, they're going to get all of the information by their 12th meeting, including costs. We don't have cost information yet, and the reason is because the estimators that work for the design firm are going to do an independent square foot concept estimate now of it. Our firm also does our own in-house estimates. We're in the process of doing those now. We do those independent of each other, then we get together and review them and analyze them, and we come to a consolidated estimate that then we present to the school building committee, and we're having that estimate meeting done on the 10th. It takes us a little bit of time, so the cost information will be part of how they decide what to do, but they won't get it until the 10th. We'll review it with them on the 12th, and then on their 19th meeting is when they'll take their vote. Everything we do gets immediately shared through the superintendent's office, gets posted right on their website, and all that information, the second we produce it, it's public record. So yes, it will be available the second we produce it and send it on to the school building committee.
And our school building committees meetings are open meetings, so the public is more than welcome to come and hear that. And they're both in here on the 12th and the 19th. Does the building committee have a preferred option at this time? I would say no. I think when we were looking at this early, you know, there's a lot of tie to the current area where it is, and we understand that the connection to Indian Village and all of that. But as we see the Conant siting and details, that is a really interesting piece of property as well, with 2 access roads and a lot more ease around water and placement that way. So we just need more information. I know I don't have an opinion yet because I need this cost information. I need other test information, and so I think we're all kind of in process.
So we've already heard that basically buildings are intended to be school buildings 50 years. So we have obviously 3 buildings right now, which is kind of the catch-22, with only the ability to do 2. As we already mentioned, I guess we're looking at, by being accepted by MSBA, first, does that mean it's less likely that we are picked again so soon? And if so, if it's 7 to 10 years, what do we do with the kids that end up, say, in Conant or Gates, whichever one is not upgraded? Because by the time those kids are there, they're looking at a building that's pushing 60 years and whatnot. And I guess a secondary part is, I know we're moving some of the pre-K into the building. What's happening to that section of the administration building as well?
Okay, so I'm going to take the first part from my understanding of MSBA. This process was really refreshing for me because it's not a political process. And I don't think I say that too often in my life. They choose who comes into the pool by need. And so if there are other buildings around the state that have greater need, we will have to wait. But we have some pretty good need. That's why Douglas got in. So we may have to wait. I can't predict, but it's not going to be because we had this project that now we're kind of at the bottom of the list. It'll be on the need of the building. Would you add anything to that?
No, I think you've said it well. I mean, like I said, I've been building schools with the MSBA since they were founded in 2004 by the new laws. And it's, in my impression, the projects that I've worked on around the Commonwealth, they have all been done by need. There's very few, I shouldn't say all, there are probably one or two out there where somebody called somebody and had a conversation, but I've not heard of them. I mean, it's just not been in my experience. The MSBA process has been very good in identifying the needs and putting them out there. We talked about this with Peter and with JD and the staff today about to make sure that they keep refreshing what's called the statement of interest. It's a application to be considered for a next project, and they do that and have been doing it since well before we got involved, and they'll keep doing it for the one school that does not get selected and for potentially some other things that can be done in the school district. So it's a process you keep submitting, and my understanding is they intend to and they should keep submitting. It is not been done, I'll say that out front, where a town gets, or a town or a school gets two projects at one time. They don't do that. There are a lot of schools that still need help around the Commonwealth. Some of their factors in choosing them is not only need, but the ability of a town, or in your area, two towns, to be able to approve the funding for a project. So they will look at long-term projects and say, well, yes, you've got a need for a project. They'll say to some town, you've got a need for a project, but you haven't passed an override vote in 15 years. What makes you think you're going to pass this one? They're very candid with their money because it's your money and they want to make sure that you're getting your share back. So they looked at you and said, you're an attractive community for them because, one, you have a school that has a real need, but two, you have taken great care of your buildings and done good things to them. And they want to see that go forward. So that's how the process works.
It's true, the MSBA is a penny for each dollar, a penny on a dollar, yes, of the sales tax. So that's where the money comes from.
So to answer the second part of that question about what do we do about whatever school's not chosen and how do we continue to meet the educational needs of students, I would actually say even prior to being accepted into the building program, all of the schools have continued to make educational upgrades to the facilities. What we've deferred are some of the major repairs because what we don't want to do is put, $1 million into a building that we know may not be there a year from now. That's just not a wise move. But from an internal perspective, there are technological upgrades that have continued even to older facilities. Ongoing maintenance to those facilities just to make sure students have quality educational experiences. The school committee this year actually established a capital subcommittee that's reviewing all of the capital items across the district and prioritizing those and what needs to be done over the next, really starting this summer up to probably the next 10 to 12 years. And so currently the capital committee has withheld including items from either Douglas, Gates, or Conant until we select this. But as of December, whichever school's not selected, those capital items will then go back into the plan. And with the eye to what do we need to do to make this a functional educational space for students for the next 7 to 10 years to make sure that those kids have a quality experience. Yeah, the admin building, as the preschool leaves the admin building, I think that's one decision that the school committee needs to make long term as to the status of that building. We still need functional administrative spaces, so that's something that we've been doing minor upgrades to that building, knowing that that's a longer term investment that we need to maintain. But I think as we look long term, that certainly is a decision on the horizon.
And just one quick follow-up. So obviously, it's going to be a combined school, seems to be the consensus, as the best thing for, the Acton-Boxborough communities. Has there been a discussion on what's going to happen with school choice when the 3 schools right now, all the parents are going to want to send their kids to the 2 brand new buildings, and then what happens when parents come back, with pitchforks about the fact that their kid is in the 60-year-old building?
That's right when I get off school committee. No, I'm totally kidding. Do you want to field that one?
Thanks. No, thank you. No, I think, it is something that we recognize will have some impact, But, you know, I don't want to get into specific schools and rates that are selected, but we don't see a direct correlation between the age of a building and how many families try to select that school. That's just not something we've seen historically, so it's, you know, there certainly may be some swing with that, with the new schools opening, but, you know, we have a process now where there's priorities given and a lottery system when space fills up. I would anticipate, we have not discussed how that might change in the future. I think we need to get through this first process first and then take a look at that. I think there's obvious, you know, there's concerns on both sides from either location that people have expressed to us, and that's something the building committee needs to consider when selecting that site. There's, you know, questions around walkability and walker status that need to be considered for the Douglas School, depending on what site's chosen. There are different opportunities that present themselves longer term as we look at busing and transportation needs, things like that. So there's an awful lot of considerations that are going to happen over in the coming years, but they're all dependent on which site gets selected for this. So that's the purpose of the forums now, is to kind of hear from community and get that feedback prior to making the decision.
And I asked that question, and it actually didn't happen with the McCarthy Town building, or the Parker Damon building, and I was surprised by that. But so I'm going to go back here because she's been waiting.
Thanks. I live in the Indian Village neighborhood, and I see a lot of my neighbors here too, so I appreciate all the work that you've done for both of those sites. I can see why Conant might be appealing. One thing I just want to put out there is, I think those of us that live close by, we're concerned about what's going to happen with the Douglas building, and you mentioned, you know, it's going to take 7 years to build a new building. In that meantime, do you plan on selling that land? Do you plan on, like, what do you plan to do with that building? Could you say more about that if the option 5 is chosen?
So if we went with option 5, then it would be the school committee who decides what happens, and in collaboration with the administration. I don't believe we'd sell the land, but I can't tell you. I just don't know what we do with it now, because like I said earlier, that it could potentially be a swing space when we build a new Gates building, so that would give us an opportunity to put the students in there while we build. So we need to really think about where we're going, and we haven't gotten to that because it's too hypothetical until December 19th. So after that, it can go on the school committee agenda. So, okay.
Hi, I'm a Douglas parent with kids who will straddle the project. We are walkers, and I'm an Elm Street abutter. So this easily is an emotional issue for me. So I challenged myself between the Tuesday forum and tonight to dive into some data. And at the Tuesday forum, there were a lot of comments about how location is an essential part of the Douglas community. We're tied to our West Acton location. And I was trying to figure out, how can I quantify this? Is this real, or am I in the bubble? So I looked at the Douglas directory. I don't have all the data that you guys would have. And I used Google Maps in the Douglas directory. And a couple things stood out to me. So location matters. Currently, there are 73 families within a 1 mile radius of Douglas. If the school moves to Conant, there will be 10. Among those 10 families, 7 are across Route 2, so they're automatically out for walker status. The other 3, I don't have the knowledge to make a call about. So immediately, there's an impact on culture, on community, and neighborhood feel. And then also, so then I took that information and overlaid the current Douglas population onto a map of town. I wanted to see where we are. Who are we of the town, just into each section broken by our largest roads. So when I looked at that, it brings a lot of questions about increased traffic and congestion. There are 153 families that currently don't cross Route 27. That's just the, what I'll call greater Indian Village and southwest between 111 and 27. So all of those families are now clogging up Kelly's Corner, they're clogging up Hayward, and the roads, Newtown, yep, the roads to the north leading in. So I have concerns about the traffic patterns, and then property values I've mentioned at other meetings, and also the stress on our students. No matter what, the Gates students and the Conant students will live through a construction project. But the Douglas students have a possible additional stress, is that they're going to be uprooted from their community. And that's something none of the other kids will face. They will stay put. And that's an important thing to consider. That's your world that they know. A kid's world is small, and that's how it should be. And to uproot you from what you know, from your neighborhood, a lot of kids are nearby, it's a really impactful, stressful experience. Moves are big for kids, and that really should not be ignored in this process. And our OPM and architects have told us that both sites have challenges, but both are viable. There's no runaway winner. Nothing's an absolute no, nothing is a slam dunk. So to me, that makes the importance of community even greater. When all is said and done, this is about the kids. This is about our community. So I really hope that we can preserve it and get a great school project out of it.
I will say, the only thing I want to say is there's still like more data coming in. So there isn't, as far as the building committee knows, there isn't one winner yet, but we still have a lot of data coming in. So your kids are dwindling, and I want to give you a chance for questions. Well, I see a lot more hands, so maybe we'll take a couple here, and then I'll go back out to the adults. Okay,
So you said that you were going to make a cafeteria bigger. So at Douglas right now, we have every lunch, there's 2 grades, and it takes a really long time to get through all of the grades. Some people are eating at 1, and if you double the schools, how many grades would be eating at once? So then, they wouldn't have to eat at 3:30.
great question.
Excellent question. Okay. How are you with division? Just getting there. Okay. So.
Me too.
Yeah. So let's say you've got 8 different classes, right? So we'll say preschool, kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and we'll count the adults. Oh, 6, right. So 8 total. So what the state says is that you have to have a cafeteria big enough to only hold 2 lunches. They think that having 3 lunchtimes, 4 lunchtimes is just doesn't make sense, because who wants to eat lunch at 10 a.m., right? Nobody, seriously. So if you have 8 different classes and you need to half them, how many grades would be eating at the same time? There you go. That's your answer.
And one of our ideas, but we're not at the detailed side yet, but we're learning from the Parker Damon building that both schools having lunch at the same time is overwhelming. One of our ideas is to have one kitchen that's shared, and then a cafeteria on one side and a cafeteria on the other side. So it wouldn't be double the kids, it would just be the kind of kids you're used to, 4 of your grades.
Yeah, and it's also possible to have a cafeteria that has different types of spaces. So some of the schools that we design, it's not just one big room, There's some smaller rooms, so you can have affinity groups, like, in a high school that we did recently, like the Spanish club or the English group, and really give students a variety of spaces to eat lunch at. It's not all the same. We see that as a trend and actually a positive thing, recognizing that not everybody likes to eat lunch the same way. So it doesn't have to be a big cafeteria room, too.
Another question?
Will we be sharing the playground, or will each school have their own playground?
Good question.
If you only know how much the adults talk about this. We're not sure. So there's some advantages to a shared playground. So let's say it's the Douglas and the Gates school, and the Douglas students have some friends that go to Gates. If you share a playground at the same time, that's an opportunity that you can see friends beyond the school that you're in. However, we recognize that 1,000 students is a lot of students, so there might be smaller playgrounds. But that's a great question. We haven't quite figured it out yet.
Okay, I'm going to go to one of the guys.
If we built it at Gates and if we built it at Conant, then how long would it take to build it at Gates, and how long would it take to build it at Conant?
We're going to let Chuck handle that one.
That's what I get to do. Well, Savathia and I get to do, I should say, because he'll be the one here all the time. How long will it take? It'll take the same at both places. How long will that take? Well, that's a tough question. It's a harder question. And the reason is because, like I said before, and as this woman here put it she put it better than I could. Both of them are tough sites. Not impossible, but harder sites. So they will take, our guess is it will take 2 years to build on either school. But there's a year from now before we even put it out to get the contractors to bid it. So that's 3 years total before it's all done, if that helps you. So it takes, there you go. Well, there you go. Well, we're building it for you guys then, because you're going to use it. And that's what we do.
Would the kids stay on the same bus? Because if you did Douglas and Gates, the buses go to Douglas first, then Gates. Like, what would be the way? Would it be?
I'm laughing because if I've learned one thing since I've come to work in your town is anytime there's a bus question, I duck.
Yeah. And I walk.
Was the question who would ride together? Right? If the Douglas site was the Conant property and it was Conant Douglas together, most likely those two schools would be combined together in a busing scenario, much like you are today with Gates. And if it was on the Gates property, status quo would probably prevail.
Are we going to have one huge building for Douglas and Gates together? Are we going to have like a Douglas wing and a Gates wing, or a Douglas wing and a Conant wing and a hallway connecting them?
Yes.
Pretty much, yeah.
Just what you said. It's going to be, the concept is being discussed through the architects and with the building committee and the superintendent's office now, is there'll be one wing for one wing for the other, and shared spaces right in the middle. That's the concept.
So, like, Douglas has a teacher's badge where they can get outside and inside of the school. And I'm just asking if, like, they would have a badge for Douglas Conant or Douglas Gates, or if they would share a teacher badge.
Boy, you're into what we call the weeds now. And I mean that in a good way, but the answer is, it's going to depend on how they want to run and operate the school. My guess is every time we build these schools, these badges now are so technologically advanced that they can be programmed to do almost anything they want them to do.
I actually have an answer.
Each teacher would have their own badge, though, to get where they need to get.
So this is something that the adults actually talk about a lot, because if you've got a Douglas school and another school and a preschool, one of the things that we need to think about is who are the right people to be at the building at the right time, and badges really help with that to identify, but it also gives people access to different areas. And so we've talked about that a little bit in visioning, because ultimately we want to keep kids safe, and we also want to make sure the right people are in the building at the time. Great question.
What will you do with the playground? Like, will you take it off the Douglas property now, or would you leave it there?
You mean if we build over at Conant? Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, if we build at Conant, then the school district will still own the Douglas property. I don't know exactly what we would do with that, so it's kind of a future decision. And in fact, it's a school committee decision, and my guess is the school committee, to the extent possible, would open it up to the community if we need community input. So if there's something we really need it for, we may not ask the community, but if we have choices, then we would invite the community to weigh in on that.
I think every school will have a playground.
Oh, yeah, the
And
schools will all have.
I thought you were going to ask about the chickens. That I can't answer.
They go with the principal.
Okay, I'm going to cycle back to the adults. Thank you so much, students. Let's see. Do you have a question?
West Acton Center seems to be thriving. I'm just curious if there's been concerns or input from the small businesses there, if Douglas were to be removed from that community as to their sustainability there.
I haven't heard anything to that effect. Here. Meet me in the middle.
I've had conversations with Derek Henry, who is the proprietor of True West, and he represents a small business group for West Acton. I can tell you just anecdotally that they're extraordinarily supportive, and they want to do anything and everything to help support schools and help support kids in our community, and whatever they feel like is best to move that forward. Then from Derek's perspective, they're very supportive of that. That's all I can offer for now.
Two questions quickly. Are both the single-phase and the multi-phase projects still in play for both locations? That's the first question. I wasn't clear on that. Or have one of them been ruled out for whatever reason? And can you talk a little bit more about traffic? You talked on Tuesday about the single-circuit bus, which I understand. But I think there are an awful lot of parents dropping off. And when you're talking about 2 schools plus preschool, what's the percentage of drivers versus buses? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Okay, so I'm going to let you take the bus in question, but I forgot the first question already, sorry. Oh, yeah. So yeah, I think they're both still on the table. One of the things the building committee is waiting to hear is the cost of phasing, and then if the cost and then the benefit, because it does cost more to do 2 phases, then is the benefit enough to warrant that cost? So we have not heard that, and we are waiting to hear that.
Yeah, and just to echo what Mary just said, yes, we're still looking at the phasing issue, and frankly, we might not have that fixed by the preferred schematic report chosen. I think that's going to be looked at as schematic design. So phasing's still on the table. In terms of the single route busing, do you want to address that? Yeah.
No, totally. In terms of ridership information, we find that about 70 to 75% of our students ride the bus at the elementary level, and about 65% ride at the high school, junior high level. Based on only 12 weeks of data, roughly, we haven't seen a precipitous decline in ridership based on the changes that we made in transportation this current year. Our ridership numbers are still up, or they're remaining relatively consistent. I'm actually working with a consulting company right now to kind of go through these first 12 weeks and verify data and look and see how the efficiencies are working, if there's any improvements can be made and things like that. But in terms of like parent pickup and ridership, we really have seen no change, but I think you can say about 25 to 30% of the population will probably be parent pickup, you know, or walker status. Oh, please.
What I do recognize is both sites present different inherent traffic concerns that need to be addressed as we go through the design phases. That's something that's been an ongoing dialogue with Emily and her team, along with Chuck and our group with building committee. I think, you know, for the West Acton site, it's, you know, how do we get the large number of traffic into Spruce Street and out of Spruce Street, along with, and forgive me, I've only been here 6 months, so I don't know the names of every street. It's not Elm, what is it? No, not Taylor, Arlington Street.
Arlington.
You know, and looking at how can we divide traffic between those two ways in and out, and is there a way to separate those out so that buses don't need to mix with cars to help reduce that flow? On the Conant site, the challenge is Taylor Road and the intersection of Route 2, and how do we navigate that system? So that's something that's still in discussion. It's certainly something that's a big consideration because it's a daily experience for the 15 minutes, really, that is arrival and dismissal. So, you know, we don't have the answer for you right now about what that looks like specifically. That's certainly something that continues to evolve over the next few weeks.
Hi there. So I'm also Acton Indian Village resident, and you know, following on a question on the West Acton, you know, sort of building up more in a commercial district sense. I mean, I appreciate the fact that, you know, True West would like to do whatever's best for the community. I'm thinking more from the kids' perspective. That's a destination for them. I'm thinking Silver Unicorn. I'm thinking New London Pizza. You know, the Fish Joint, the ballet school, they're all destinations. You know, forgive my ignorance, but I don't know of anything around Conant other than houses and the Arboretum, which is fantastic, but we also have Jenks and other conservation lands. So, you know, if I'm going to speak for anyone, I'll speak for my kids and what they'd like to do after school. So, one consideration. The other one is sort of, I guess, more hypothetical because I'm fairly confident there's no defined answer right now. But let's say as a compromise, if we combine Douglas with Conant, what is the plan prospectively for Gates? Is it just gut rehab, or are we talking expansion so there's still an anchor school, a significant population that can be served in the West Acton area?
So we've talked about this a little bit, and we can't say definitively because it depends on the trends in the future. But we actually think that if it were Douglas Conant, then Gates we would keep in the MSBA pool, and as soon as it's selected, we're thinking that then it would get sized as a larger school than the current Gates. Maybe not the size that we're talking about now, but larger, because that would help with our enrollment across the district. We're getting tight already in some of our schools, and so that's what I would anticipate, so that then you would have a sizable school in the Indian Village community and the West Acton community.
So one thing, you know, and this actually ties together a few questions, because some of the questions have been around what's the future of the Douglas property, you know, regardless of which site's chosen. I think one thing that, you know, we've started to talk about and explore that needs more exploration is why that it would be important to retain that property as a school district, because it provides flexibility on a number of fronts. One is it could provide a swing space if we replace the Gates School, but the other is that by retaining that property, it also provides an alternate site for the Gates School location, because you could actually, you know, leave Gates students where they were and actually replace the building on the Douglas property and move students after. So I think there's a lot of flexibility in both ways, and that's something that, again, you know, we can't really, you know, I think there's been a lot of questions about, you know, if we chose this scenario, what would happen here, or if with busing or something else. But I think one of the challenges is there's only so many scenarios we can play out that far into the future. So it really is dependent on which way this school project ends up going. But I think it's a great question.
So I have two quick questions. So the first one is, so last year, we had water problems where it was yellow and brown. So is there going to be water like that's clean at the new school?
I'm going to say yes. We are striving for clean water. I don't know what caused yellow and brown water, but absolutely, that's part of our good, healthy, clean environment for our students.
And then my second question is, the people at Douglas, are they going to be able to move to the new school so then they get to keep their job if they're really good at it?
Yeah.
What a beautiful question. Yes, the staff will move to the new school, and so they get to keep their jobs. Yes, absolutely.
So I passed around a notebook to the students asking them what they wanted to see in the new Douglas school. And to your point, there was one note that said, I would like to have the same teachers.
Yeah. Yay.
Hi there, I'm Nancy Stillman and a Douglas parent, West Acton resident. And to just add on to the folks in terms of neighborhood and in terms of being able to go to West Acton for the kids, Douglas has a wonderful, rich, very integrated relationship with the land around our building. It's the reason that I chose Douglas was because of nature walks, and I just think that that's really important to note, that we're not just this building that can be replaced, but the whole sense of the school and so much of what we do at the school and how we interact, with our environment is critical to that space. So I would just encourage you to think about that as well. That's not something we can just uproot and put someplace else. That space around our building is very important.
I'd like to reiterate the comments about the local businesses. I mean, I'm sure True Rest the bar might not have a big impact by the elementary school moving, but my family stops by the cafe in the morning or the coffee shop, the dry cleaners, because it's right next to the school and it's convenient. I'm sure we're not the only ones. So I would encourage you before the decision to more formally reach out to the West Acton community, West Acton businesses. I also wanted to ask, at the town meeting a year ago, when this was overwhelmingly passed, it was voted on as the Douglas Gates option, Douglas Gates Combined School being the preferred option. Does that have any specific meaning to this committee and weight in the committee? What does that mean for the committee?
So I'll try to field that. We haven't talked about it specifically, but from my perspective, we really do understand the connection that the West Acton community has to that location. And so for me, if it were equal, if I look at all of the pros and cons and they're kind of balancing equally, I'm going to favor a West Acton Gates site option. And I feel that the committee is leaning that way as well. But if we see evidence that, well, there's more pros on the Conant site, then although the other option was preferred, we might go that way. So I think there's a strong connection to the Gates Douglas, the Gates site, but it's going to weigh on all of the evidence.
Hi, just to follow up on the superintendent's comments about having a potential swing school if there's other construction, it's a fact that if you have a unpopulated school, it's a lot faster, a lot cheaper to do any kind of renovations. Perhaps maybe there was a lesson learned in letting go of the old town building, which was renovated into condos now. That might have helped in all this situation. So I would say it's probably a good idea to hold on to it. Second question, can anyone tell me approximately how far the Douglas School is currently from the Gates School? Going over the bridge? 800 feet? So, okay, so it's clear that some people are very passionate about having a community school and walkability. So if ostensibly the school committee could prioritize all of West Acton, including Indian Village, for placement at that school, if people wanted to, that would mean the walkers would have an additional 800 feet if it wasn't to the existing school. Is that correct?
So you're saying if we did a Conant Douglas and then for Indian Village priority to the Gates School. So we haven't, this is an administrative decision. We have talked about this, I've emailed about this a little bit. What we would envision, well, we didn't talk about it from just a Gates option. What would the walkability definition be for priority status into the Gates School? Do you want to wager on that one? We talked about if it was a combined school on the Gates property, we would do the line from Elm Street, and so that the Indian Village community would have walkability status to the new school. But if it's an option where the consolidated school is on the Conant site, then what happens with walkability status to the Gates School?
Look at it, see how much trouble I could get in here. Yeah. So typically we look at a safe walk to the school of choice, and I typically measure that. We get walker requests annually, typically less than you would imagine, quite frankly. We measure a walk from, I usually use a driveway center point of a property and snake through till we get to the nearest property line of whatever that school may be. Assuming a Douglas Gates school was sited on a Gates property, I think you would be safe to assume under those scenarios where the walkway, the West Acton Boardwalk, which I was there to work through with the Friends of West Acton Boardwalk group 10 years ago, as well as the bridge would be improved, and some kind of utility vehicle would be able to remove snow, and we keep that clear, no different than any other sidewalk. I think you would have to assume that as soon as you hit the Elm Street side of that property, that's a safe walk to finishing out that site over to Gates. If that whole thing moves to Conant, I think this is where I'm out over my skis, because we haven't really discussed this as a leadership team. Perhaps there's a way to look at more of a proximity solution as a crow flies or something of that nature to recognize the value, because there's value in having students that are proximal to a school building going to that school building. There's a great deal of operational value to that. There's a great deal of sustainability related to that. So we recognize that. We want to preserve that. I'd say to be determined.
I guess my short answer is that is something I would want to look at, and how we can make that feasible. I think, that's the quick answer, is something should happen so that families can continue to walk to school. I think that's important. I think, one thing that I think is the difficult part of that answer is if you said to every family who wanted walker status then, now you'd also be looking at a process where you'd have to displace other families from Gates, obviously, in order to be able to do that. So there's the easy philosophical answer of yes, but it needs a plan for how that gets enacted over time as well. Sometimes we want that quick solution, but it may not be an instant solution that's available.
Thank you. Thank you all. You're incredible with your organization and your planning and everything that you're considering. It's a vast array of just pieces to put together. I'm also an Indian Village resident. I live just about 4 doors down from the current Douglas School, and part of why I chose Douglas was, the incredible community that I could feel when I walked in the building, even though the building is so old and absolutely needs to be replaced. But it's also because my children could grow up walking to school. So it is a highly emotional change for me to think that my children may have to get on a bus. Quite frankly, I don't trust them to do that, so I will drive them to a new school if that is a necessity. And quite frankly, I would consider pulling them now, which breaks my heart, and potentially switching them to the current gates so that they will continue to have the ability to walk my children to school, to walk to their library classes. I get emotional about anything. It's like, it happens at the grocery store, I'm sorry. But I really do feel that the location in proximity to my house, it drove me to buy the house that I bought to know that we had the school choice and that that might be an option for us. It partially also led our decision to live in Acton. So it's an enormous burden on the families that have chosen that if the school does get moved. So I really do hope that that is being valued and considered. And I do think that there will be families that may choose immediately on the 12th, on the 19th, to really consider switching their kids' education to a different location, despite the fact that Douglas is the best school. But I also think it is something for the town to consider that Boxborough has close proximity currently to both Douglas and Gates. And I think that drives some families to choose to come to the closer town or the closer schools in Acton. And I hope that we can continue to encourage that, because the integration of the two towns, I think, is really beneficial for all of us in both. Another somewhat emotional piece relating to the community that I wanted to share, the community in West Acton and the merchants, I don't know that they're fully aware of all of the decisions being made or the process, and I would love to see them be more of a part of it. In part, I've heard that there may be an ice cream store, and I would absolutely just die to know that my kids could go walk out and get ice cream after school. I mean, I just think that would be incredible. And I had a couple other questions, if it's okay for me to keep this for another second. Sorry, I tend to ramble. One of my other questions was back to the transportation and the safe walks. I think there's been a lot of conversation on some of the Acton parent forums online about the current safety in our town with kids walking and riding bikes, and there's been some tragedy in town. And I think the crossing of Route 27 would be pretty risky. I myself have been driving down 27 and seen crosswalks that are poorly lit. And I think there would be families that would make the choice to continue to try to walk from the West Acton area across 27. And so one of my questions is there going to be some upgrade to our crosswalk system in town? Are the police aware of, I'm sure that they will be, but I would hope that there would be some significant improvement.
No, actually, the traffic safety is a huge concern in walker safety. That's something that the town manager and I have been in active conversations throughout the year. You mentioned Route 27 specifically, so I'll address that one first. The biggest issue with Route 27 is that is a state highway. We can't independently make changes. The town can't choose to just make changes to a state highway. There's a whole approval process that has to take place for that. So it is something that's in discussions. We've had significant discussions with the town about how the Kelly's Corner project can improve walker safety all around the campus that we have here. And then, I know the town also has a sidewalk committee that's looking at crosswalk safety and things like that. So that's actively in process.
Yeah, I actually just wanted to add one other thing, and it really, I'm feeling vulnerable about the answer about West Acton. I just want to let everyone know that I'm a West Acton resident. I live on Windsor Avenue. My family and I, my two little kids, I have elementary age kids, we walk all over West Acton. We access everything there. It's the Kirkmans who are opening the creamery. They're close friends. Well aware of that, and certainly well aware of the smart growth and planning aspects and all those things that go along with centers and population centers and all that. So, get it, definitely.
Okay, I see one more hand.
Just to follow up on the sort of, I guess, pace of things. So, let's assume everything just lines up beautifully, like a row of dominoes, and nothing gets in our way with the building, pulling permits, we break ground. What are we talking about, best case scenario, if we like hit the ground running, whichever property we choose? And then, because, you know, you're telling us that it's unlikely that you're going to get two projects funded at the same time because it's just not really feasible anyway, moving kids around. So, you know, how soon, if in a utopian vision, we could go from building the new combined school and then, you know, then getting to the, you know, Gates renovation, expansion, compromise, if that's the choice?
So I'm going to 7 to 10 years. Yeah, I think 3 years if everything lined up for this project. We've done a lot of the groundwork is done for the Gates site, but we'd have to get invited into the MSBA process. So that could be a 5 to 7 years. So 7 to 10 years.
Yeah, no, I just want to say it's very emotional to hear the love of the neighborhood of West Acton. And I also want to take this opportunity to just thank the kids. I mean, just want to give them a round of applause. Best questions of the night, no question, one after the other. I just want to say that, you know, this presentation did start with the word sustainability. And as much as it is, you know, a tremendous benefit to the community to keep the school in West Acton, it has to be safe and sustainable. And if you know, building a school right along Guggins Brook is going to be too much of a hazard, we have to be strong and we have to be future focused. Because this is a school that is, you know, supposed to last, you know, a good many decades. And the floods are coming faster and faster.
This is a procedural question. So at the next two meetings, typically you talk and then after there's audience comments or questions, can we change that agenda and put audience feedback earlier? Because there are going to be many people who go home and think after this, and many people who read online and watch the video, and I think it's important that we allow for that feedback too.
Absolutely, I've been thinking about that. So my problem is I often sit with my back to the audience because we're in a square, and then someone says at the end, Mary, the audience. So we will put it earlier. I think it would behoove the public to hear whatever information Aerostreet's going to share with us, because that could also influence what you're thinking. But I will add to the agenda an earlier public comment so that we do that. Yes, and we may even rearrange the room so that nobody's backs, or it depends on, because we have to see presentation as well, so we'll figure something out that works. So thank you for that.
Tara Fredericks again. I was just thinking, and I love you guys, like I really want to keep you guys together, and I'm thinking to myself, like, why doesn't Douglas become a community center and a free school, and you could just take a huge bus and take everybody to Douglas, and they could walk from Douglas and be like right there. And I don't know, I mean, I love the idea that you're with the land, and I don't want to lose that at all costs, even if it's the Gates. Like, let's keep that a community swing center, you know what I mean? Like, it could be something really beautiful, and as a taxpayer, I'm willing to pay for that. I would pay for the expensive keep Douglas and redo the Douglas thing, and I just want people to know that. Thank you.
All right, I want to thank you all for coming tonight. It's vitally important for you to hear us, but frankly for us to hear you. So thank you for coming and sharing your viewpoints. Please keep informed, and we'll do our best to keep pushing out information, and look to our website for any additional information. So thank you.